Okay, I'm going to give you guys a brief overview of the reverse osmosis system, or RO system, that we're using to filter our maple water, or sap, through to cut the time in half for processing it to maple syrup. So this is the system I built. We take in our maple water, or sap, in this bucket right here. And then it goes through this red tube, in through the pump right here, and then it goes through, this is the first filter. It goes through and it filters out all the big stuff, the dirt, leaves, or whatever's in the buckets. And then it goes through the RO filter. There's 4 of those, so 1 in the back, 3 in the front. And then from there, a normal reverse osmosis system, you would actually keep the clean water, or the permeate. That's what you would, in a house system, you would drink that water. In this system, we take the permeate and it goes into this bucket, and we discard that after we're done with it. With this RO system, we actually keep the dirty water, or the concentrate. In this case is concentrated sugar water, or maple water. So that comes out of this tube right here, and this is the product that we're going to take, and we're going to actually put on our evaporator and boil it until we get our finished maple syrup. So that's just a brief overview of the system we're using. This saves a lot of time, not having to boil as much maple water. So it basically cuts the time in half that we need to process the syrup to get to finished syrup. So here we are, we're boiling today. Just going to go over the process that we use here with our makeshift evaporator. So right here we have our 2 main boiling pans, and then up top here is one of our preheat pans, and then we have another preheat pan on a propane fired burner. So we take our maple water that we ran through the reverse osmosis system yesterday, and then first we put it into the preheat pan up here, and then we put it into this preheat pan to get it boiling, and then once it's boiling in that pan, we put it over into the other 2 main evaporating pans. So the reason for that is we don't want to, once we get this water boiling here, we don't want to stop it. So we want to keep that boil going as long as possible and keep it consistent. That's mainly how our system works. So our evaporator is a little different than what you'd see in a professional operation, since we're basically condensing all of our pans down to these 2 main boiling pans eventually, and then we'll boil to a certain point, and then I'll take the pans, or the very close to being finished maple syrup, and finish boil it either on a propane stove, or inside where I can have a much more controlled environment. Normally a professional evaporator setup would have baffled pans, and they're constantly drawing off maple syrup. So as the maple syrup, or the sap, boils, the higher sugar content creates a natural gradient in the pans, and it'll flow to one side of the pan, and they'll draw that maple syrup off as it's finished. So or very close to being finished, and they'll finish boil it somewhere else. So our system's a little bit different, something that we made up, and as a result of our boiling in condensing and boiling in 2 pans till we get pretty close to the finished product, our maple syrup is a little bit darker because it's cooking a little bit longer, and it's caramelizing the sugars. So the end product will be a little bit darker than what you see in stores that they boil with a professional pan setup. But that's just a little overview of the setup we have here, and as we boil today. Alright, we're here doing our finished boil inside on the stove in a nice controlled environment where we can keep track of the temperature and make sure that it reaches the correct temperature where it officially becomes maple syrup. So maple syrup officially becomes maple syrup when it boils at 219. So water obviously boils at 212 degrees. Because of the sugar content in the maple syrup, it boils at 219. So you know that enough of the water content is gone and your sugar content is where it should be when it boils at 219. We do our finished boiling inside because it's a nice controlled environment, whereas boiling, if we did our finished boil on the stove or on the evaporator, it's wood fired and it's a lot harder to control the temperature of the syrup. So we do it inside on the stove where it's nice and controlled. So again, we're looking for that 219 temperature, and then a lot of times when the syrup gets close to being finished, the bubbles will change shape, they become larger and more viscous, and then we know we officially have maple syrup. And here's the finished product. Good old Maine maple syrup. Put it on your pancakes and your waffles, or whatever else you want to.